It was 30 hours of flying door to door to get here. So thank you for inviting me and welcoming me into this beautiful city. One does not simply rebuild a product. A. Jackson said that it takes 3 times as long as you'd expect to rewrite a system. And a colleague of mine at Culture Amp very kindly said, a rebuild is never finished, only started. How philosophical. Culture Amp is an employee experience platform that does a whole bunch of things that you don't care about. Particularly, I work on the performance product, which you don't care about much either. But I'll tell you that it helps customers to build high performing teams, which eventually lead to better business outcomes. That's all I'm going to say about the company today. So this performance product came into Culture Amp through an acquisition of a Series A startup 5 years ago in 2019. At the time, it was really small, but since then, we've grown it to thousands of customers today. Now, in total, these customers launch anywhere between 850 to 1,000 performance review cycles in 1 month. And our largest cycle has about 45,000 employees participating. That's just to give you an idea of the scale and set the stage for this talk. So the global potential performance market, though, is $3 billion. This is where we want to go someday, towards a performance product that can lead this global potential market. Obviously, we are very far away from it right now. Up until last year, there were many compounding technical obstacles in our way of building that market-leading performance product. So this product is 2 monoliths, one for the front end and one for the back end. The underlying domain model, data model, backend models, and architecture were all outdated, and our customer needs had evolved since we bought this product originally. There were also other modules sharing the same code base with us, so one-on-ones and our goals products were all inside the same monolithic code base. A whole bunch of shared concerns all lived in the same house as well. So things like notifications, tasks, authorization, things that you would call maybe more platform concerns. Then on top of that, there was an enormous amount of tech debt from trying to scale and grow the product rapidly post-acquisition. And then finally, it contained a lot of decisions that were correct decisions at the time that they were made by the developers trying to bring this to market quickly, but they were not correct decisions anymore in 2023. There were also 8 teams working inside these 2 monoliths with terrible domain separation. There were too few people who understood how the entire system worked or how both the code bases worked. Teams would invest weeks in starting a feature, and then they just wouldn't be able to finish because they would collide with another team working in a completely different part of the code base, or so they thought. There was high coupling and low ownership. The monoliths could not benefit from any shared tooling or infrastructure that was available at Culture Amp. All of this combined to create a very fearful engineering culture, low engagement, low pride in our work, and teams moving very slowly. Basically, I am describing the opposite of a high-performance culture. The product itself was working for our customers and it was meeting expectations. But in the near future, these challenges that I described before, they would have seen us grind to a halt, unable to innovate. So we needed to invest now to ensure that this product would continue to grow and scale and serve our customers for many more years. To cut a long story short, we were stuck in a hole that maybe looks familiar to many of you. My name is Prakriti, so I'm a director of engineering, as you heard. I'm here from Australia at my first European conference, Represent. So I'm just going to take a quick photo so I have proof that I was actually here. So today I'm here to talk you through our journey of getting out of that hole via a full rebuild. I'll share a few key reflections at every step, and I'm hoping that maybe that will make you feel less alone the next time that you are in a hole going on a similar journey. Let's start with the first step. So the first step was getting to the point where we even knew that we needed to rebuild. Before any talk of rebuilding, obviously we tried everything else. I used to hear a lot of noise when I joined about enormous tech debt. There's so much tech debt, we're drowning in tech debt. But this tech debt didn't have any shape, any name, or any classification. It was not understood by our stakeholders. The cost that it was exacting was not appreciated. So we started by identifying every last bit of tech debt inside the monoliths. We gave it a classification and we gave it a name. We ensured that senior leadership, exec, our cross-functional partners in product and design could all talk about it. Then we prioritized it bit by bit, like everyone does. We tried to fix it. We tried to chip away at it. That was taking way too long. And even if we did fix all the tech debt, remember, it was only one ring in those 5 rings of problems that I showed you before. So it would still leave us unable to iterate on the underlying domain and data models, even if we somehow fixed all of the tech debt. So next we tried piecemeal re-architecture. Inside the monoliths, we identified domains that we could re-architect while keeping the monolith around those domains functional and working. This actually worked, but it was way too slow. We had to finish doing the piecemeal architecture, and then we had to take the product to winning in the market as well. That would have taken far too long. So in parallel with re-architecting, we also tried extracting domains out of the monoliths. Everything was deeply intertwined, just a big bowl of mud spaghetti. We did not have quick foundations for starting up new microservices. Mud spaghetti, delicious. Why did I say that? We did not have any shared services available to solve common concerns like notifications, emails, authentication, authorization, account data, employee data. Where were we going to get all of this information? We set up a small dedicated Tiger team, and they executed one example domain. They extracted it from the monolith, they documented it, and they created a pattern for other teams to follow. But again, doing all of this helped us realize the reality, which is none of these approaches would get us where we needed in time to lead the market. So we basically needed a really big reset. Now, as I go through the steps, I said I'll share a few key reflections at every step, a few things that went well for us during this first step. What was previously a very amorphous statement of, oh no, too much tech debt, that turned into a clear breakdown with prioritization and rough difficulty levels for all the major items of tech debt. We were able to take that and use it to create visibility among leaders outside of the performance product, building awareness, empathy, and understanding in the rest of the organization. We worked cross-functionally, so that meant even if I personally was not present in the room, there were other people from product and design who would also be able to raise tech concerns and have that shared language. And then trying everything else possible before suggesting the rebuild, doing it with high transparency, meant that everyone was more receptive to hearing that we needed to start over from scratch. A few things that I've learned for next time. Maybe I should have suggested it sooner. Now, this is a really tricky one because if you suggest it very soon, then people assume, it's just engineers being engineers. They always want a fresh start. They want to rewrite everything. They want to work on greenfield. They hate legacy. And I feel like no one takes you seriously. But if you leave it too long, then you've wasted valuable time that you could have actually invested in rebuilding the product. The second one is establishing trust and then seeking forgiveness over permission. We did a lot of the groundwork without asking for explicit permission because we had already built some trust. Now that we knew what had to be done, the second step was to get buy-in from everyone else. We needed buy-in from the teams who were going to do this work, from design and product peers, from senior leadership, that's other directors and VPs, and then finally we needed buy-in from exec and the board as well. To get that buy-in, first we needed to know where we want this product to go. This is a radar showing everything that the rebuild will unlock for our customers in the outer rings. So it's the promise of what can come after a rebuild, opportunities that are not even possible with the current monoliths. We started with some blue sky architecture brainstorming. We got a bunch of engineers in a room and we said, hey, if there were no constraints, knowing what you've learned today from our current product, its limitations, and where we want it to go, how would you architect this product from scratch? We did a lot of brainstorming sessions and people came up with many different architecture options. Then we converged all those options into a potential architecture for the new rebuilt product. The goal here was just to validate the need for a rebuild. We didn't want to decide the architecture down to every last detail at this point. We just wanted to say that if we took an ideal architecture and we compared it with what we are living with currently, then how different does it look? If it looks very different, that makes our case for the rebuild much stronger. So building that radar of opportunities, doing these architecture exercises, they helped us to get buy-in from the team. We involved cross-functional stakeholders like product and design in the conversation throughout, and we kept senior leadership close to the work, so that was enough to get buy-in from them as well. And then, of course, the previous things I shared that we tried before doing the rebuild, we tried working on tech debt, piecemeal re-architecture, that helped get senior leadership on board as well, because they knew that we weren't just jumping ahead to a rebuild. To get exec buy-in, obviously, we needed a few more steps here. We consulted a trusted external advisor. This is someone who has successfully actually completed a rebuild, but I think more importantly, they have seen several rebuild failure modes and they kind of know what doesn't work as well. Finally, we took all these inputs and we put them together in an exec presentation, which told the holistic story of the performance product. I feel like that last step is probably what got us through the final 20% of buy-in. We were seeking approval to completely rebuild this product from scratch, which is a really big deal for this company. But it couldn't mean that our customers would see no new value for a year or 2 years, or who knows how long it's going to take. I know now, but at that time we didn't know. So the broader performance offering needed to continue on in other ways. While we would be rebuilding our first piece, the other perform teams would deliver the most critical work that was necessary before we could go all in on the rebuild together. That helped us to get exec buy-in. Some reflections for step 2. So things we did well. I think talking to that neutral external advisor who had a lot of experience under their belt was great because it gave a lot of credibility to our plan. Then one of our product VPs did a great job taking everything that we had pitched and crafting a holistic narrative. He put our customers first in that conversation rather than focusing purely on the engineering side of things, even though this was an engineering rebuild. We took the time to work out loud with our stakeholders, being deliberate about who needs to be included in every conversation, ensuring that they were coming with us on every step of the journey, so that when we came with our final ask, it was not a surprise for them. Instead, by that point, they were kind of invested, and now they sort of wanted it as well. And finally, slowing down at this step really enabled us to go faster later. Although slowing down kind of cost us as well, so that was a bit of a double-edged sword. We worked away from the teams longer than I originally wanted to, which created a lot of uncertainty for engineers. Imagine you're in a team just working on the regular performance roadmap, and then in the background, there's all these people and all these talks about a rebuild, but it's all whispers and murmurs, and it's not very clear. I also wish that we had created more active spaces for debating our tech choices collectively as a group. I feel like we failed to get true buy-in on some of these tech choices at the start, which later on contributed for our pivot. So we had to pivot away from Hanami back to Rails after we had written a lot of code. Normally I duck after I say that, but I don't see any Hanami enthusiasts throwing things at me, so I'll just keep going. It also shaved a few years of my lifespan because it shook some confidence in what was already a really big bet. Now we had buy-in, but it was still a very big risky ask. We proposed that we'll pick up one slice, we'll deliver it all the way to our customers. In doing so, we'll prove out our new architecture, the new domain model, the technology choices, and our ability to actually do this in a reasonable time frame. There was an immense amount of pressure and high visibility on this first slice. Literally, the whole company's eyes were looking at the team working on this. That's because it was a big bet for the entire company, not just for this product. We knew that if the first slice failed or went sideways, that it would risk the existence of the rest of this rebuild. All of this made it very important for us to kick off really strong with the first slice because there was a lot riding on it. We had to set it up to succeed with everything that was available to us. So we started by setting some goals. We all love setting goals. On the product side, our goal was to produce a domain model that we can iterate on, architecture which will support future use cases, clear ownership for teams during and after the rebuild. Well, that sounded too easy, and we like to live dangerously. So I shared earlier some challenges that the teams were facing at the time. We thought, fuck it, let's rebuild the teams as well. So at the same time as rebuilding the product, we also decided we're going to create fast-moving teams, strong engineering culture, strong ways of working, high engagement, opportunities for learning, growth and development, all of those things. We were going to do it all. We were going to do it simultaneously in a really aggressive time frame. That was fucking crazy. Who decided to do that? It was me. We laid out some ground rules or principles to try and help us succeed here. We called the first principle like for like. We were not going to uplift the entire user experience, and we were not going to add any new features at all. We were going to take our existing product and stand it up over here on a future-proof code base and domain model using the latest tooling and foundations. We would be reasonable, of course, and we would try to do things the right way. We would end of life some features that were not being used. We would use our design system components, and we would set high standards. But we were not going to add anything new. That was for two main reasons. Firstly, we don't want this rebuild to last forever. If we tried to redesign the entire customer experience while also rebuilding the entire domain model and rewriting every single line of code, that was going to be a never-ending project. We didn't want continuously changing goalposts. Secondly, we wanted to reduce customer risk as much as possible. The rebuild should be invisible to customers. They really don't care. Our next principle was that we would phrase the monoliths. We would not allow the old and the new product to potentially drift away from each other in different directions. We would not allow any communication back from the new product to the old one, and we would never allow some customers to be sitting on the old and some customers to be sitting on the new for long periods of time. Decommissioning the old one was part of our definition of done. And then finally, we resolved to be deliberate in every step we take. We are taking the time and we are putting in effort to create high engineering and design standards. We are investing in building high-performing teams as we go through this journey. The total scope of the rebuild, which we call core performance, was divided into roughly 6 pieces. Obviously, you don't care about this product and what the 6 pieces are, so let's just use this as a representation. For the first piece, the first slice, we picked up self-reflections. So we chose self-reflections for these reasons. Firstly, it was well used by customers. We wanted real customer traffic to the first slice. Otherwise, how would we validate our choices? Second, it was in the worst shape of all 6 pieces because it had not been touched in the longest. The third reason was that it was relatively isolated, so big, very massive ball of spaghetti, but self-reflections maybe could have been untangled a little bit. That means that we could focus one full team on self-reflections rebuild, while the other teams continue on their normal roadmaps, delivering the most critical customer features. This gave us time and space to validate our decisions in the first slice, while also solving some immediate customer needs before we phrase the monoliths entirely. This was essential to that last 20% of buy-in that I mentioned before, forming the holistic narrative around the rebuild. And then finally, self-reflections had just the right level of complexity. We didn't want too much and we didn't want it to be too easy either. We felt like if we can do this one, then it'll be a fair representation to say, now we have some confidence that we can probably do the others as well. Then we took a few targeted steps to set up this first slice for success. We created a Goldilocks timeframe commitment, long enough that we do it right, but not so short that we are forced to cut a lot of corners. This timeframe commitment would make us think about trade-offs rather than spending too long trying to rebuild everything perfectly. We kicked off with a small A team of sorts. We brought in a mix of our strong performers, domain knowledge, subject matter experts, embedded in knowledge of adjacent things like the design system, front-end tooling, back-end tooling, by bringing in people from other teams across the org. I feel like this GIF reveals my age, and if you didn't laugh, I know your age as well. We then took a firm stance of adopting all internal standards. Where internal standards didn't exist yet because of varying maturity levels, like accessibility was not super mature at the time, we tried to establish our own informal metrics while still maintaining high speed. And we needed an internal PR campaign to get people excited. This initiative would have felt really risky, intimidating, too ambitious maybe, and quite scary, so we needed a PR campaign to get people buzzed about it. Most of that work, and we actually did manage to ship the first slice. Overall, I would say it went really well. But of course, I would say that it's my project. But no, really, we didn't ship anywhere close to the initial date that had been suggested to us as a target, but we did ship very close to the first estimate delivered by the team. We scaled up as we rolled out to larger and riskier customers. We had very few incidents. This was the most crucial step of all 5. So most of what I shared in the previous slides, the goals, the principles, how we set the team up for success, it's all part of what went well in this step, but I will add a few more reflections at this stage. We set up a clear decision-making framework that allowed us to move fast. It helped us get clarity on what's the decision, who is the decision maker, who do they need to consult, what's the level of the decision, and an engagement model with our senior leadership stakeholders. Obviously, this was a very exciting project, and everyone at the company wanted to have their fingers in this pie. But this saved us from being blocked by the availability and schedules of others, from seeking approval for everything, and from having too many cooks in the kitchen. I don't know if you've noticed, but all my metaphors are around food, and maybe that's something that I should reflect in myself. But I'll keep going for now. It empowered the team to make bold choices and move fast. And honestly, I feel like that one point is enough for its own conference talk. We had a lot of firm trade-off conversations, and we aggressively protected the scope of the EAP. We took on a few informed risks, of course. The Goldilocks timeframe was really good because it forced us to avoid gold plating and think hard about what's good enough and what standards do you need to set. We got clear prioritization from exec and leadership. That helped us to get capacity dedicated across other teams where we had dependencies. The first slice had 18 dependencies outside the perform teams. And then we invested time early in building a new domain model for the entire product, not just for the first slice. We did that with a cross-functional group involving a few key leadership stakeholders as well. This was a tough ride, which means a lot of lessons learned for me. First of all, the initial target date, the high visibility, high pressure of the market and the company, it made the team feel really stressed. Then establishing momentum was a big struggle for them. They had been thrown into the deep end and asked to start building this immediately and not given any time to plan. Many of the team members were strangers to each other because we brought them in from different parts of the company. So they were not able to prioritize planning, refinement, estimation at the correct stages of the project. They eventually did these things, but it was quite late, and by then it had already impacted their momentum and their engagement. We also learned a lot of lessons on dependency management. This is the biggest cross-team initiative that has ever been done at CultureAmp. CultureAmp has about 300 people in the product group, and this is the biggest we had ever done. At the time, we didn't have a high maturity model to manage dependencies and cross-team collaboration, particularly because we knew this project would take at least a year. That was quite a big ask. We have all that stuff now, which is good. Now, with this rebuild being like for like, it looks fairly invisible to customers, so it's kind of hard to measure success. We could not measure success in the usual ways, like you have a hypothesis, you validate the hypothesis, you have product analytics, customer adoption, revenue metrics, like that's how you would normally measure success, but we couldn't do that because it was invisible. We had to define what metrics were important to measure and how we would measure them to ensure that ongoing buy-in. We decided to go with engineering and customer experience metrics instead. So think back to the goals I had shared before and the principles. We wanted the new experience to feel similar or a little bit better, but it definitely could not be worse. And we also wanted teams to feel pride in their work, like they are high-performing, delivering high-quality products. We used the largest contentful paint time as a simple proxy for the customer experience metric. A good LCP is considered up to 2.5 seconds. So the old product's average was 3.3 seconds, very bad. The new one's average is 1.5 seconds, very good. The max LCP of the new product is also in the green range. Now, there are a few features that are really heavy and they deal with a lot of data, so we measured the performance of just those features separately, and we assumed that if these features are improved, we don't need to check the performance of every single action that the customer can take. On the developer experience side of things, the front-end deploy time used to be 20 to 40 minutes. Now it's under 10 minutes, and the back-end deploy time was 40 minutes to an hour, and now it's less than 5 minutes. We also made huge improvements to the adoption of our design system and accessibility. One metric which we did not use at the time, but I have gone back and added it into the slides recently. So in the old product, there were 560 usability issues just sitting in the design backlog. And then as we've gone through the rebuild, we've already fixed 312 of those issues, even though we are rebuilding like for like. So that's a huge customer experience improvement. What can I say about this step? Everyone loves a good metric. We were able to prove that even though we are building like for like, we are still delivering measurable customer value as well as CultureAmp value. It's not just an engineering rebuild. Anything we can do to make that ongoing buy-in easy, particularly from people outside of engineering and product who may not understand why we're doing this. We did struggle to measure some of these metrics. The old version is very hard to work with. We need to invest more time, I think, upfront in instrumenting this. And I would also love to set up specific metrics next time to instrument key trade-off decisions so we can validate afterwards whether we made the right decision or not. It was a really hard journey, but we did it. We shipped the first slice. We gained confidence that we knew what we were talking about and we were on the right track. We had a massive retro and reflection session, paused for celebration, recognition, acknowledgement, shawarma. Unfortunately, it was not too long of a break. We immediately were forced to pivot to what's next. 1 down, 5 to go. Project's basically done, am I right? We had to take everything we learned from the first slice, which was pages and pages of wins and lessons, and turn that into a plan for the remaining 5 slices. But we did not have a plan, or to be more truthful, I did not have a plan. We had done just enough big picture thinking to validate the need for the rebuild and to get buy-in. But then after we shipped the first slice, suddenly we were expected to have a plan for the remaining 5 slices. We didn't have even a P, forget about a plan. So remember when I showed you this radar? We went back to the radar. First, we extracted some potential future roadmap items to use as examples. It was important to never lose sight of why we're doing this rebuild. It's not just for fun. It's easy to get lost inside the weeds of a mostly technical rebuild. We had to keep current the opportunities that the rebuild needs to unlock to be considered a success. It was time for, you guessed it, more brainstorming. We got a group together and we considered multiple potential architecture options, this time for the entire scope of the product based on what we had learned from the small first slice. Next, we thought of possible team structures for the remaining slices. Now that the first slice had shipped, we had frozen the monoliths, and we could put all 4 teams onto the rebuild initiative. We overlaid those team structures on top of the architecture options. Those are the crude circles in the screenshot. Yes, that is the peak of my visual design skills. Then we considered different stakeholders' perspectives on what we should optimize for. The idea was not to just arrive at one list. It was more about surfacing unspoken priorities and gauging that we were at least 80% aligned directionally. Finally, we picked the option that made sense for everything I talked about. So first, the anticipated product roadmap, then layer on top of that the architecture options, and then layer on top of that the ideal team structures, which allow fast iteration, domain ownership, and high performance. So imagine all 3 in layers. I only have 2 hands. We needed a plan that worked vertically across all of these layers. I present to you the plan. So things that served us well in this phase. The overlay method of looking at major facets that could influence our success simultaneously. Product roadmap, ideal path architecture, ideal team composition, that was a bit unusual. But considering all these together allowed us to see the trade-offs very clearly and to come up with the most acceptable plan. Getting clarity on what everyone was optimizing for was really important. Everyone was coming at it from their own area of expertise. We had to get that shared understanding to help us find the option that worked for the most attributes that we wanted to optimize. We tried to set a cultural expectations in the teams that you should prepare for frequent change, and we asked them for high agility as we went through the rebuild. And finally, it's very rare at Culture Amp to have one product space with multiple teams focusing on only one initiative with very few distractions. That focus was a gift, and so we tried to leverage it as much as possible. A couple of things we struggled with in this step. The high change environment. We needed to pivot this plan a couple of times. As always happens, plans don't go as per plan. No matter how much you try to set those expectations early, change is still hard, and not everyone can be equally resilient. The visibility and the pressure that we thought would decrease after the first slice did not decrease. I don't even know how, but somehow it actually increased. So let's skip ahead a few months. This is where we are now, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We know what we're doing. A lot of unknown unknowns have been validated. Now we only have known unknowns. We've put 4 teams on it instead of 1 team, so we have maximum parallelization. We are about to ship the next 3 pieces all together by the end of this month because customers use them all together. Their data is linked. And remember the principle about V2 not communicating back to V1, so they have to move all together. So that's like very, very, very close to done, as you can see in the middle box there. Hopefully by the time I return from this conference, that middle chunk will have shipped. Yes, I left at the perfect time, by the way, while the team is trying to just ship that last bit of the most critical slice of this rebuild. It's fine. So that will leave just one last slice remaining, which we have started, and we are hoping to finish by the end of this year. And then profit, I guess. Is this talk being recorded and uploaded? So it's on the record now that it's going to ship by the end of this year. That's great. Cool, 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 cool. So I'm not going to talk about step 6 today. We are still executing the final bits of the rebuild, and step 6 is not done yet. I'm not really sure how it's going to finish. If everything goes to shit, then it's going to finish this way. But if things go as planned, then it's going to finish this way. So I guess you'll have to invite me back to the conference next year if you want to find out how it ends. So people say that rebuilds are always a bad idea. I'm here to disagree. I say that if you have a domain model that can't take the product forward, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. You're stuck with Series A decisions that are band-aided over and over again. Your teams are slowly grinding to a halt, and you have a lot of tight coupling. You have an underperforming product, but it is a huge potential market for that product, and you have tried everything else. Then a rebuild could be your best shot. You could do it with steps that look something like this, with the stuff I shared earlier, what went well for us, what didn't go well for us, and the lessons that we learned. However, if these conditions are not true for you, then I can't help you. You're on your own and you've just wasted the last half an hour. I'm kidding. It doesn't necessarily mean that a rebuild is not for you, but you might need to look at the steps I shared before, the things that went well and didn't go well for us, and you might need to figure out how to tweak those for success in your specific conditions. But I mean, yeah, it could also mean that a rebuild is not the right step for you. I'm not here to sell rebuilds, by the way. I don't know. I just work here. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please find me afterwards or hit me up on Discord.